through the practice of music, he has brought this to bear on many of the burning subjects of our time. So it is a real challenge for me to be in conversation with him. Of course, I know nothing about music, but I can sing to save my life. If lions and tigers and sloth bears attack me, I can drive them away by singing. You may not be able to do that. And also, I am no match for Krishna's sartorial style. He's always dressed in style. But I am here now today because my reputation as one of the premier historians of Tamil Nadu is in danger of being usurped by Krishna. So I am going to be throwing googlies, beamers, and bouncers, so be prepared. So over the last, as I said, for the last 12 years, he has published, as we know, very widely columns. But the real test of I would say, a scholar, like, I will use perhaps inappropriate musical metaphors, a real test of a musician, I suppose, is singing the Ragam Dhanam Pallavi. So similarly, yes, columns are one thing. To write full-fledged books, to maintain an argument over hundreds of pages is a true test of a scholar and an author. And Krishna has demonstrated it with 3 very important books. As Gautam mentioned, 13 years ago, Amartya Sen released his Southern Music. Then some years ago, he published this landmark book, Sebastian and Sons. Now he has come up with this 3rd book. In this sense, he has also published a volume of your columns. But this is a real monograph. And all these books have a undercurrent of history. History not just as the past, as something about the data about the past, but as a process that informs what we are and how we are going to be. So if this first book was rooted in the history of music, its theory and practice, the second book also had a sociological inflection. As I said in the release, on the occasion of the release of the Tamil translation of that book, even if you take away the information that Krishna is a acclaimed singer, award-winning singer, just by the quality of that book, he would be elected to the fellowship of any serious body of historians and sociologists. Now I think with this book, he has really made a great leap in terms of, forget, the political and contemporary implications of his work. As a historian, first, I want to say something about the deep historical research that has gone into this book. As all of you by now know what the book is all about, it's taken up 4 or 5 symbols of independent India, the symbols that were shaped through the process of the freedom struggle, and looked at how these symbols were chosen, what meanings were imputed to these symbols, and how they were contested in their own times, and what do they mean now. He looks at all these things, and it is based on a really, really rich body of archival work. The bibliography and the notes at the end of the book is not meant to actually intimidate you, but more as the buttress for the arguments that he's making. And when I'm saying that, he has done this research extensively, much of this research has not been done earlier by professional historians. Even though, recently there have been a couple of books. There was this, the book on the national flag has been fairly well worked out, but even here he has brought new insights. I will talk about it. More recently, there was a revised edition of Sabyasachi Bhattacharya's book on Vande Mataram. Vande Mataram, there are two things that cast a long shadow on this book. One benign and one very malign. The malign one being the partition and the bitter animosity between communities. The benign shadow is that of Vande Mataram. Yeah? So these books, despite these books, the richness of the data that he has marshaled is simply amazing. So that is the first point that I want to make. Before you actually get into the book, do you want to say something about how you decided to pick this up? Of course, that is in a sense obvious. We are the flags are both symbols and they are also being weaponized at the same time. So this is not a academic book on our national symbols, but is something that is animating us today. People are showing these symbols with a lot of chest thumping and breast beating that you mentioned, but it is also meant to exclude others. So first tell me, how you went about, why did you choose this topic? If there must have been some spark that lit this fire, and how did you go about marshalling this data?
First of all, I'd like to thank Chalapati for such a generous introduction. I'm truly overwhelmed. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. I think there are 2-3 triggers, so to speak, on why I wrote this book. One is, of course, the song Jana Gana Mana. Not just the anthem bit, but the song. For various reasons, I looked at the full song, and I started singing the other verses of the song. And I think that was the first trigger, because I was deeply moved.
When was this?
This was maybe 2019 or so, around that time. And I was very deeply moved by the song. And I started wondering, what is my relationship with the song? Not with the anthem. The moment something is an anthem, I know we can argue whether we really have a relationship, that's an important question, but even that becomes there's a formality to the relationship. There is also some amount of forced respect at some level. But as a musician, I never saw it as a song. The first time I saw Jana Gana Mana as a song, and I started reading the second verse, which to me should have been part of the anthem, and it is in the context that you placed it, where we see violence every day. We see hate every day. And we see these symbols themselves being weaponized. And I do get up many mornings wondering, this feeling in the pit of your stomach, not knowing what to do. Can you even do something about it, right? And I think it is a combination of this feeling and me stumbling upon this song that triggered it. But what triggered is an accidental statement I made at a talk. When just completely accidentally, I called Jana Gana Mana a protest song. It happened just in one of those flow things. But that comment stayed with me, what I said. So why did I say it? I think that was the first time I felt that I must look at symbols, because I think somewhere we failed at looking at the power of these symbols and what they mean to us today, why we have chosen them, is their history, are the meanings, before we say they're being manipulated, what do we really feel? Does Satyameva Jayate even mean anything to us, right? So these questions started growing. Then I said, okay, maybe I can pen down something. The initial idea was supposed to be 5 essays of 5,000 words each. But as soon as I jumped in, I suddenly realized this is again territory that I have not really gone into, which is very deep archival territory. And like you said, at least for Vande Mataram and Jana Gana Mana and the flag, there has been some historical material, scholastic material. In the case of, for example, the emblem and the motto, there was no material. Nobody had written about it. Nobody even knew how it was chosen, who chose it, when. Constituent Assembly doesn't discuss it. So when did it happen? I filed RTA applications to check whether I will get anything. They sent me 1971 letters and data. Not good enough. So it is fascinating that we don't know. So it's interesting we accepted something, but we don't know who did it. Was it executive decision? But what happened? Why that design? So this intrigue began. And preamble is traditionally not a symbol. I mean, it is really not a symbol in that sense. But I think the CAA protest was one of the reasons why, in my memory, it became a symbol. Because it suddenly became a symbol of sovereignty, a symbol of protest, of resistance, of taking ownership in a way of the Constitution. Right? So I just, and
So how did you go about doing this research? Obviously, it has taken you
yes,
5-6 years.
yes,
And I think the questions that you posed to some of the authorities in the field actually fox them, right? Can you say something about the questions that you posed kind of destabilized existing commonplace conceptions about, just give me
like one simple example. Everybody knows Venkaya Pingali, classic example. And you just Google his name, it will tell you that he is the one who designed the flag. And I am going to very confidently say he did not. There are 2-3 reasons why. Was he a great proponent of a flag? Yes, probably before anybody else. He publishes this little booklet in 1916 called The Flag of India. And he's inspired by Sister Nivedita's, whose essay is read, but he didn't remember her name, interestingly.
It just says RS.
It says RS, okay? And he publishes this book, and in which there's one, like, you know, those books that you have this, you can open a page, it's folded page with color images, with 28 designs. And honestly, like crazy designs. There's no way any of that could have been our flag. Suddenly a banana tree is one of the symbols of the flag. Another one is Kali. But it's just a passion of this man, you know. He just felt we needed a flag. But he makes some very astute observations in that little preface to his book. He says, the only way Indians see themselves is religiously. We can only see ourselves in terms of religion. There's a man writing, and by the way, he worked in National College in Andhra Pradesh. We don't know what exact position he held. There are different stories to it. So he was not part of some intellectual gang or anything. So he says we only see ourselves as religious. So what does he do? He does something fascinating. He takes the flag and he says, what is the population of Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Jains, Parsis, and Buddhists? He divides the flag according to the population of each community. So the Hindus get a larger portion, the Muslims slightly less, Christians slightly less, and then little stream will be one the Parsis. Gives each of them one color, pink, green, blue, orange. And the Union Jack is in all of them. Okay? Because at that time it was Dominion as that idea is in the head. Now, none of his flags, they're all a little messy in construction, in aesthetics, everything. Now, the fact is Gandhi did not have a thought for a flag for a very long time. He was not interested in a flag. It's only around 1918-19, around that period is when he starts realizing that the flag is important. And then he, of course, he knows Bengali has been coming to every Congress meeting and pushing this whole flag issue down people's throats. He says, I'm not impressed with this man at all.
Kind of monomaniacs.
Complete. And you'll find a lot of letters he writes about this. And he says, nobody's supporting me. He wants to make handkerchiefs with flags. He really is like completely a flag activist, if you could call him that. So then, of course, Gandhi comes to this conclusion that we need a flag. And one thing he's not sure about is what symbol should be below. Hans Raj, his colleague in Punjab, says it has to be Charkha, because Charkha is the soul of what Gandhi was speaking about. So anyway, Gandhi comes to Bezwada for a meeting, Congress meeting. The second day, he calls Pingali. And he has already designed the flag, Gandhi. He wants him to execute it. I'm sure Pingali did not paint it himself. Now, how? So one is aesthetically, Pingali could have never thought of this kind of a flag. Impossible. Secondly, Gandhi himself says it almost 4 times in his life. I created the flag. I invented the flag. When I conceived the flag, again and again, you can take what you want from it. But he keeps saying it. He keeps saying that I'm the one who created the flag. So it's very clear, for example, though every scholar has written Venkaya Pingali, it is not Venkaya Pingali. It is Gandhi's design. And Gandhi also conceived of it only religiously. It's only around 10 years later, around 1929, when he changes the narrative and in fact says members of the Congress are not happy with religious connotations to the flag. So he's actually responding at that point of time to a different political scene. Also, I think a push saying that I think we have to think differently about these colors. Then sacrifice and peace and all these narrations appear. So this was one little interesting nugget that I picked up. The other thing, Of course, I mean, in terms of the two things that people talk a lot about is, of course, Janagana Mana and Vande Mataram. And in that, there was two, three things that I felt somehow being missed. And one of the reasons being, I think historians do not see musical aspects. Fair enough. Fair enough. It's fair enough. So, one.
We are all artistically challenged.
No, I know, I didn't say all that. You're saying all that. But,
Confession.
okay. But so, when I looked at these two songs, and my brain automatically is a musical brain. So I said, okay, what is the music of this, right? Now, Vande Mataram is the most fascinating song to study. Janagana Mana is just a brilliant song. Everything about it, constructionally, poetically, is just brilliant. Okay? Vande Mataram is a tricky song because one, it was not written at one shot. So Bankim writes there's a confusion now because the government of India says 6 verses. Sorry, it's 4 verses. The government of India mistakes it because 4 verses because even Aurobindo translates it as 4 verses.
When even the language of the poem is the subject of debate.
Yes, I agree with you.
It is.
So anyway, because
everything is a subject.
I'm just clarifying because then you understand where I'm coming from. So the first 2 verses are written about 1872. This most scholars agree. Satyameva Jayate himself talks about it in his book.
Because it mentions the population, so
it matches with the Bengal population. So it's
after
understandable.
1871.
Then around 75 to 80 is when he's writing Anand. And there's some very interesting narrations about people finding the song in the floor of his study and wanting to publish it in the magazine Balak and all that. Anyway, he writes the rest of the song. Vande Mataram has about 150 tunes. Minimum.
So you mentioned 125 in this book.
Yeah, apparently it's gone up after that.
Since writing the book,
I'm told now there are more. Now, the most interesting thing about it is what sometimes we can study intention of a song through form, through poetic form and musical form. So I took that route and I said, okay, what does the form tell you? It tells me 2 very interesting things. If you look at the lyrical content of every verse, the first verse is a very descriptive verse. It could be actually attributed to anybody sing on any land. Just beautiful landscape-ish kind of a description. Towards the end of that verse, of course, it becomes a little anthropomorphic and she becomes a person. Suddenly you have Bharat Mata appearing as a person. The second verse, there is a tonal shift. Suddenly there is anger, there is resistance, there is the cries of 70 crore people. Even that shift disturbs the song because the measure of words changes drastically. Suddenly there is also one Bengali line that comes in from nowhere. Now this disturbs the musical form of the song immediately. Okay, and I think that itself is a transition that where the song becomes a little destabilized. Then you go to the third and fourth verse, which is very clearly written because he wrote Anand. As a song, sorry, but the song collapses. Because meter is gone, form is gone. Could it be multiple meters? I tried doing that, looked at all the forms. Then the song has 4 verses just doesn't hold. What you then realize is Bankim, towards the last 2 lines, suddenly realizes he has to come back to the refrain and shifts form back to Vande Mataram form. Namami Kamalam, Amalam, Athulam, Sujalam, Supalam, Mataram, Vande Mataram. That's perfect sync in terms of sound, in terms of form, in terms of measure, everything. So I really think that tells you that there is something going on in the mind of the author himself. That somehow this song has changed its notion, it's changed its reason of existence and its employability. Because in Anandamat, you have to just say that this song is part of a very violent process. Anandamat is not a benign text. I disagree with people who think it's just political. No. Please read it. They are these Hindu sannyasins attacking, pillaging Muslim villages, constantly saying they have to be eradicated, removed from here. And Vande Mataram is actually a song of initiation for those people who joined the Hindu sannyasins group. So it's not just Mir Jafar who is the target, it is a community. Now I think when the shift happens, the Durga appears from very strong. The moment that happens, the composition as a song aesthetically collapses. This was something that I could bring onto the discussion table, which I don't think historians could, because I could look at the different tunes. In fact, the best tunes of it is actually either somebody tuning only the first verse, or there's an Omkara Thakur rendition where he removed rhythm completely from it. and just sang it like a melody. There it works. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Yes, the strength of your book is that all through the aesthetic and the artistic runs as an undercurrent. It's there and it informs the book and gives it great beauty. In fact, the book itself, I would wanted to say towards the end, I know I'm jumping all over because the book itself is like that, It's like Krishna, jumps from one thing to other. Generally, we think of digression as a weakness of any writing. In Tamil itself, Matrondru Virittal is one of the kutrams. It's not the right thing. But I would say it is like, the manodharmam of a concept. You have to improvise all the time.
I've also wondered about my digressions, and I think it's completely because I'm a musician. I actually really believe that's what it is, because I also sometimes read what I write and think, where am I going from here? Even I look at it sometimes. But then I realize it's coming from thinking musically, where you do these sudden shifts and you find a way to come back, right? So I think it comes from
So
a musical.
all books need not be linear. Teleology doesn't work. So, but that is one aspect of your book, technique that you have employed. Perhaps you can come to it. But to coming back to the national flag, it set me thinking. As always, there is a very strong Tamil chauvinist in me. So this book is, of course, full of Bengali Butterlok men. Well, that is the fate of Indian history. So, very big names and great minds. Yeah, we should all be proud of it. Starting from the Buddha and Ashoka to Gandhi, Nehru, Dr. Ambedkar, Tagore, Bankim, they're all there. But our own Bharati makes a couple of appearances. But here, since you are also fascinated by these great minds, even when you are critical of them, your respect and admiration for them comes through. Even when you actually say some not very nice things about Tagore singing. I hope, have you had an event in Calcutta already?
Not yet.
Not yet. So be prepared, go with some bouncers and bodyguards. Okay. So, but our own Bharati figures
Of course.
in a couple of places, but we are to blame. We have not provided you with all the material. What amazed me was that I think my friend and a great Bharati scholar Manigandan might be here this year. Yeah. So he has been doing some path-breaking work. So as we all know, he wrote this famous Thai in Manikudi Parir. And Manikudi later on becomes the masthead and the name of the journal, Renaissance journal, in which once again a galaxy of intellectuals were involved, from Stalin Srinivasan to Varam Samayengar to T.S. Choklingam. So he writes this poem, Thai in Manikudi Parir, Adai Taalndu Panindu Pugalndida Varir. The operative paragraph for our purposes is Indiran Vachiramor Pal, Adil Engal Turkar Ilam Pirayor Pal, Thai Mandiram Naduvura Thondrum, Adan Manbai Vaguttida Vallavan Yamam. So we were familiar with this. We had assumed that first it owes to Madam Kama's flag, which she unfurled in the Stuttgart Socialist Congress. Then later we revised our position, saying that it is drawn from Sister Nivedita's Vajra. But reading your narration closely and based on the dating of this song, what is amazing is that first, this song falls between these two representations, Kama's 1907 representation and 1909 event. But here is where both the genius and the all-encompassing and inclusive vision of Bharati comes through. If you remember what you have written, in Kama's representation, there is the sun and the moon to represent Hindus and Muslims.
Yes.
In Nivedita's, only Hindus are represented
Through the Vajra.
through the Vajra, Indra's
and the color also.
Color.
Yes.
You know what Bharati has done? Before Nivedita, he has used Indiran Vajram. He refers to the Vajram. But he also incorporates the crescent. And when he refers to the Muslims, what does he say? He says, Yengal Turukkar Ilam Pirai. So it is our Muslims, it's not somebody else's Muslims. And then in between, he weaves in Thai Mandiram Naduvurat Thondrum. That is, Vande Mataram appears in between.
It does.
See, there is, until this point, I don't think there was a real representational flag. If you look at all the police reports, first disabuse yourself of the idea that flag is rectangle. Flag need not be rectangle. Yeah, it is triangle, oftentimes just a piece of cloth. It is not proportional. And the police reports refer to it as Swadesi flag, Swaraj flag, and often Vande Mataram itself becomes, that is the only image or character that is mentioned on the flag. We don't even know the color of these flags.
So it is also possible that he was inspired not by Kama, but by the Calcutta flag. Because before Kama's flag, in 1906, you have the Calcutta flag unveiled. And the Kama's flag is this whole question of whether Kama was inspired by the Calcutta flag. Calcutta flag was unveiled 1 year after partition of Bengal, when there was this huge protest, and in fact the Bengali newspaper has an incredible whole page on how that entire procession took place, the number of people who participated. And that flag was pretty much the same color, ordering a little confusing. It had Vande Mataram including too. So
and Bharati attended that Congress.
So my feeling is high, and it's also said that the next Congress, it was used. So it's also possible that it was not Kama's flag, it was a Calcutta flag. But I am surprised about Vajra, because even in the Hindu imagination, Vajra is not the first thing that will come to your mind if you want to represent Hindus. So I find it quite fascinating that
probably
both
is grounding in the Vedas.
Maybe, because that's why Nivedita also comes up with the same Vajra as a symbolic aspect.
And as we know, Bharati was called Nivedita, his guru, and he dedicated at least 3 of his books to her. So that is one aspect. So there are so many other names that keep coming up. I think let us continue with our fascination for the figures that you mentioned.
Sure.
So now in recent times, you have been fascinated by the figure of Ashoka. Right? You have very important sections of him in your book. You have probably the first time ever the edicts have been set to music, and you have sung it. This is a kind of discovery for yourself, right? The same way that Princep might have discovered Ashoka in the 19th century, and Dr. Ambedkar might have discovered Buddha and Ashoka in the 1920s and 30s. You have kind of discovered him musically as well. So, and Ashoka is a deeply conflicted figure.
Yes.
Right? Because he had to be conflicted, because on the one hand, he is burdened with the duty to conquer and rule and govern. On the other hand, he has had this transformation. So what does the dilemmas of Ashoka, what does it tell, what can it communicate to us today, and what is the message that our rulers, they should
I really don't know whether the last part is even answerable. But the one thing about Ashoka that's most fascinating, let's place him in context. 200 years before Common Era, what were every king writing about? How much land he conquered, how much territory he has, how much wealth he gave people, donations. These are what they are mostly writing about. And here you have this man suddenly coming up and almost giving a moral science class at some level to his praja, and also telling his bureaucrats how they should behave, how they should treat the praja. And then he's doing something very unusual. It's almost a confessional at some level. He's also confessing. He's saying, this is how I was, this is what happened when I became the king, or 10 years after I was the king, I changed. Now, this is first of all fascinating for a public figure. Now, a monarch does not have to do this. Let alone elected representatives. A monarch doesn't have to do this. But he's
At best, he can be a canute, right?
That's right, exactly. So here you have this very unusual thing. Finally, of course, settles on 14 constant edicts. First, there's some play here and there. And in the 14 edicts, of course, everybody knows the Kalinga edict, right? Everybody knows that the edict, there are two things about the edict, and that kind of gives you the complexity of the personality. So in the Kalinga edict, he is talking about the fact that he went to conquer Kalinga. 150,000 people were killed, 100,000 people were maimed, and he finishes that part of the edict by saying, asking this reflective question, saying, a contrite Ashoka is saying, did I really conquer Kalinga? You know, almost a very emotive kind of a thing to pause. Now, there are 4 lines after that, or 3 lines after that, which we don't see. Now, immediately after saying this, something else he's saying. The tonality of the edict just shifts drastically. Now, remember, at that time, the people of the forest were the ones who were other people, he used to call them the borderers or the forest people. The forest people were the ones who were resisting Ashoka the most, because just practically resource was in the forest. For war, elephants are in the forest. And the tribal population were the one who were resisting him because he wanted resources. Don't think I don't have aggression in me. I can come with power and force and get you. Now, to me, this coupling of these two together was the most fascinating thing. Because this is a very interesting conflict, but also very real. The whole issue of power, at the same time realization, and this flipping between the two. For me, that symbolized a lot of the struggles that probably we all also have. You know, one moment we'll be the most generous person. It will shift if that person, say, just crosses one line that you have drawn for that person. You will treat the same person differently in 10 seconds, right? So we all do this. It's not just Ashoka. So for me, it's very personal at some level. It's like, yeah, I do this too. So Ashoka is real. One of the problems with Ashoka is, I get why Nehru was fascinated, and I propose that he almost saw himself as an internationalist like Ashoka. But that led also to a certain amount of hagiography of not dealing with this. To me, this makes Ashoka more accessible than thinking of this ideal human being. This is one part of Ashoka. Then there's another part of Ashoka. One of the edicts is probably the first time in the world you have a list of birds and animals that cannot be killed. 24 or 28 he names an edict, right? That you cannot kill anymore. This is something you can't think about in that period. So you have this side of Ashoka, right? So Ashoka is, I think, a fascinating figure because he also reflects the reality of maybe the people who are making these symbols, choice of symbols. You see that play happening in a Gandhi. In fact, for example, you ask the question, Gandhi wrote everything. I mean, you know everything about Gandhi because Gandhi wrote it. But you can ask this question. Could a person who didn't have the privilege of Gandhi be so open about themselves? It's a tough question. I'm not sure. Could a woman have been so open about her everyday lives and published every letter? Impossible. So there is this double whammy here.
We don't even find private diaries of women in the Indian context.
Exactly. So you have this interesting thing. The fact that he was so open was incredible honesty and integrity, but also an empowering thing. So there is this very, very delicate issue that constantly happens within Ashoka or Gandhi that fascinated me, that I felt was very, very important. Then, of course, Romila, there's other part of this edict. Now, this edict on Kalinga, wherever there are 14 edicts, it's there. Only place it is not there is in Kalinga. In Dholi, it's not there. So, of course, Professor Romila Thapar has a very strong take on it. I think I'm slightly more generous to Ashoka on that because I think he's saying something. So the big question was, I remember the first time I published the edict, Professor Thapar's email to me actually had that question. He said, okay, you said all this, but can you explain this to me? So I actually think the answer is kind of there in the edict. In the last 14th edict. Now, why didn't he publish it? You could say, one, that he was obviously trying to wipe that memory off. Or was he trying to make them go beyond it? And some way I feel that, because he replaces the 13th edict with a new set of edicts. And I've seen the edict there, where he says, my praja are like my children. He's not said that anywhere else. And then he calls his bureaucrats and says, Even if a person has death penalty, you must allow him to meet his family, meet his beloved, and all that. And then I'll send special officers.
Can they be given straws?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's an important question. So I really feel, and then he says at the last edict, sometimes I have not published some things or changed words because people have told me that it is not appropriate or don't do it. So I think the missing edict in Dholi is a decision of saying we need to somehow go beyond this, somehow allow the people to integrate into his kingdom, which is why he's missing it. Whereas scholars have believed that there is certain conniving play in that. I don't think so.
Krishna, in your book, one very very healthy aspect of the book is that there are no villains in this book. Actually, there are villainous thoughts, villainous actions. There are no actual villains in this book, and you also one place you say that you do not want to get into this Gandhi versus Ambedkar trap, which is, it's very easy to be sectarian, take positions, and fire from one shoulder and target another person. We are doing it all the time. So you have looked at all these figures. Which figure at the end you find the most difficult to handle, or the figure that you found most fascinating?
Most difficult to handle is Gandhi, no doubt about it. Most complicated figure to handle, because that is why when I went into that debate of, because there's a whole conversation on dharma around these lion capitals, because it symbolizes dharma, and the debate on Gandhi and Ambedkar comes in terms of dharma and caste and social equality. It was very complicated to try and understand what was going on in this man's mind, because the positions are problematic. There are certain parts that you say, yeah, this makes sense, but then he's not taking that one step, right? He's not able to make that commitment to say, no, this is flawed. Varnashrama is not something I can ever accept. So,
but that is very consistent all through his life.
Yes,
right?
but
the last killer punch is something that Gandhi never gets.
Exactly, and that is complicated, because I'm saying that's complicated because if you read his other writings, you kind of think that this man is going to get there, and also look at his public action. His public action speaks kind of differently. So for me, I was reading all scholars. Of course, some scholars give explanations for it as being strategy, etc., etc. The one thing that I felt that I kind of make an argument, and in fact, in that I don't agree with Gandhi in most cases, and I do agree with Ambedkar's arguments. I feel that, and that's where I think I reflected on, say, even a person today, a person with caste privilege, who is involved in what you could call anti-caste action. There is a struggle, and the struggle is, we forget that in our society, our every cultural memory is embedded in caste. You can't have a cultural memory that does not have caste in it. You may not call it that. Your every religious memory is caste specific. It has got to do something that is specific to your location, everything. So, if I commit to say this entire structure needs demolition, annihilation of caste, there is this fear of the annihilation of cultural memory. And I think that is something most people with caste privilege, even if they are within quotes progressive, etc., struggle with. And to me, I think Gandhi was never able to resolve that. Because in his mind, the destruction of caste meant destruction of cultural memory. Or Varnashrama, to be more specific. Which is why he kept on saying there was this ideal Varnashrama. What you have now is a corrupted version. You have to remove the corrupted version. But there was this ideal. And this ideal is completely a smoke screen that we hear even today. There could have never been an ideal. Irrespective of culture, human beings have behaved the same for the last 3,000 years. There's nothing different about us. If you're born in Timbuktu or Chennai, it doesn't make a difference. So to think that suddenly 2,000 years ago we wouldn't have oppressed, power wouldn't have been something that we loved, is just ridiculous. And to think that somebody who made chappals would be treated samely as somebody who crowned a king, it sounds kind of, brainless. Right? But, so I think that Gandhi was really struggling. And I understand the struggle in some way. But we have to also learn from that struggle. That's how I see it. And I say it in the book. I said Gandhi's struggle is a learning for me. To say that, how do I have memories? So I have to think about how do I create my memories. So is there a memory for me, which is about my childhood, say about the things I do with my parents, or say the religious functions in my house, even if it is religious, where I can say that it still exists, but I would call out the fact that it's still casteist. The two things coexist. So that's why Gandhi is fascinating. In fact, that whole portion, I took so long to write. Because I was wondering how, I didn't know, first of all, how to go about this, because scholars have all written about the other aspects of it. And I also, in some ways, Ambedkar is this absolutely incredibly dynamic man who just says it as it is. But he's also a man who's struggling. He's also a man who's frustrated at some level. And I feel sometimes his anger, which you hear in his language, is also frustration. Here is this incredible intellect, incredible mind, who's kind of found his own narrative by reading the world in some ways, who is struggling to say, I am the person you should be listening to. And he wants to say that. So there is that both parts, the giving, the pushback, the frustration. I think this whole world was fascinating to look at.
I also want to, one of the difficulties of writing a book like this on the subject that you have written is everybody has an opinion. And most of it is based on misconceptions, willful distortions. So, setting the story right regarding Janagaramana, can you tell me this process, how after so many iterations of what actually happened, we still are stuck with some of these canards that are spread. It's almost like, it's like the story of Mail Ravan. Yeah. So if you slay the Mail Ravanan, immediately, thousands of Mail Ravanans, they sprout from each drop of blood. You can see that in Facebook posts. Once you have written up what you think is, the last word on something, the 10th comment is a reiteration of the whole thing. So, then tell me, what is this origin of, the canard that Tagore,
yes,
the Bhagya Vidata is not, is actually
King George
the King George of all people.
Exactly. You've chosen a better person. But anyway, but the funny thing is, there's some videos of me talking about exactly this. Comment under the videos. I've explained it.
Yes.
Tagore wrote this song on King George. I'm like, didn't you see the video? No. So this has been going on from pretty much immediately after the song was composed and rendered. But Tagore has done something quite interesting there. So first, it is true Tagore was asked to write a song on King George, but that's a fact. Tagore himself says it. And he doesn't name the person who came. There's some speculation, and speculation is in the book also. So Tagore actually uses very colorful language, but he basically was absolutely irritated that somebody had the gall to come and ask him to write a song on King George. So the imagination goes like this, that irritated Tagore goes to bed, gets up early next morning, and comes up with Janagana Mana Adhinayaka Jaye, and he hands it to that person. Obviously, that person knew that sort of song can be rendered when King George comes. So Tagore himself says that was definitely not something he was interested in. He left me and went. Now, what does Tagore do?
And he also says that that person, whatever he might have lacked, he wouldn't have lacked common sense.
Yeah, he's scathing. Well, actually, Tagore's language is marvelous. You could just read him for the language. It's marvelous. So how to be nasty without somebody thinking you're being nasty, right? I mean, it's very hard, but he does it pretty well. But so he sends this guy away, and then what he does is interesting. He doesn't just keep the song. So the same December, the Congress has its national conference in Kolkata. He hands over the same song to the Congress. Now, I think there was not this is completely a political act. You have King George coming. Now, the point is King George had a darbar. The first time the king was coming for a darbar was in Delhi in 1911. It was also a very important occasion because The partitioning of Bengal was being resented and Bengal is going to become one. So, this is the context. So, we also should remember that Swaraj meant so many things at different times. We keep forgetting that. Independence, now things are straight independence. No. So, I mean, for example, Gandhi in his Swaraj says something quite radical. He says, you know, if everybody finds Swaraj, it's irrelevant whether the British leave India or not. Now, imagine if I had said this today. I would be booked for sedition. But it's a fascinating argument. So he's saying if the Britisher who's here, if all of us here find freedom and dignity, I'm adding that, then they will leave by themselves. And even if they remain, it doesn't matter. It's what a fascinating argument to make at that point of time. Anyway, he makes this argument. So at that time, Swaraj also meant dominion to some people it meant equality, it was rights, it was representation, getting a seat on the table. So, understanding this, you should understand that when the...
I just want to add that, Bharati had a very different concept.
Yes, there were a few other people also, not just Bharati. Even, for example...
Very clearly says that,
yeah.
We have representational government. He's talking about that in 1906, 1907.
Aurobindo also, to a large extent, completely was in a different take on
I understand this. Swaraj was so polysemic, it meant... could mean anything to
anybody.
Everything to everybody.
Everybody, right? So what happens now is that during that Congress session, on the second day, two songs are rendered. One is a song in Hindustani praising King George. First, you remember generally saying "Hail the King" or "King George, bless the King, live long" was normal in all Congress meetings. Okay, they all said it. To live under the British flag is a boon to the Indians. They're not normal things. You find it everywhere for years. So those shouts, "Oh King, long live the King George," all that has happened. This Hindustani song is rendered, which is in praise of King George, because George has made sure Bengal partition is rescinded. Then there is a song by Tagore, which is rendered by the same choir, which is a celebration of the country. The only newspaper that gets this right and publishes the text of Janaganamana is the Bengali. They actually publish the text. Everybody else, especially other English papers, the Bengali papers got right, they either willfully confused it or confused it. You're most welcome to believe either or. Okay? Where they say song by Tagore praising King George was rendered, and different versions of the stories get published. The moment this happens, everybody says Tagore sang Janaganamana in praise. Adhinayaka is King George. It is very clear that this was something that bothered Tagore, because in January itself next year he publishes Bharata Bhagya Vidata, he publishes a song in his own publication. And he says it again and again to his student also. I must be a stupid idiot to be singing a song on George or anybody else. But this lie has gone on and on. And then there is also this funny stories that come called long-winded through other sources, saying that interestingly in 1913, when he's traveling the States, when he's asked to sing Vande Mataram, he forgets the lyrics of Vande Mataram. Tagore forgets Vande Mataram. He says he's one of the first people to sing it, by the way. So Janagana Mana, he gives it to the Congress and the Congress sings it. Now the question is, why did this man do this? I think this was political point. The last verse of Janagana Mana is about the sun rising behind the eastern hills. And I think he was saying something. It was, the thing about Janagana Mana, it starts as a description, geographical description. Then it goes into a community description. He says, Hindu Bodh, Shiko Jaina, Porashiko, Mushalmanu, Kristani. Then he talks about all these people as travelers, traveling on the rugged track.
Can you sing that line?
Oh, I should have brought the text. If I get the lyrics wrong, pardon me, I just... Oh, maybe.
You wouldn't know.
Ohoraho tobo, ahwano prochorito, shunito udaroba, poroshiko, mushalmanu kristani, purab paschim ashe, tobo shingashono pashe, prema harono togata. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And every time I sing it, I get goosebumps. Every time I sing this line, I choke, because it's such a construction. And then he goes on to say, we are travelers. We are all travelers, common travelers, in this rugged path. And finally he says, the sun will rise. And maybe he was telling the Congress to get their act together. And telling them if the sun has to rise, well it rise. And you please remember Tagore spent a lot of time in Shillong. So one girl many years ago asked me, why is there no northeast in this anthem? And then I suddenly realized the eastern hills are the northeast. And he says that the sun will rise from behind the eastern hills. And that's how he finished the song. So it's almost a call that independence or freedom in that sense will happen. So, I mean, Tagore is a fascinating person. Yeah, and I think he was the only man who could really call out Gandhi in a manner where Gandhi's defenses fell apart. The famous argument about the Charkha, Tagore's arguments are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And it went through 5 years, from I think 1920 to 25. These two absolute intellectual giants are arguing constantly. And the only man who calls it a cult is Tagore. The whole of India is saying, oh, Charkha is very good, everybody should do Charkha. And this man is saying, what is wrong with you? You're killing people's creative spirit. You're making them mechanized. Where is the free will? Where is the creativity? Where is the imagination of the individual? Gandhi shouts back and saying, what are you talking about imagination? We are not free. We have to come together. Everybody should understand what labor is. The privileged should know what labor is. They should know what difficulty is. They should know to make their own clothes. And Tagore says, you're asking people who have no clothes to throw clothes of foreigners. They don't care if it's a foreigner's clothes or Indian clothes. He's asking me, have you ever been nude, is what he's asking. I mean, imagine this discussion. And Gandhi, honestly, his understanding of music is more like a device. Music.
Will you let the Tamil shamanist in me speak?
Please.
Barely 250 meters from here,
Huh.
Subramanya Bharati had to wait to see Gandhi.
Huh.
But even without the privilege,
Huh.
he had the courage of conviction to confront Gandhi right from 1950. While praising him, he could also be critical of his. That is, so without any of the privilege of
So I have to tell you, Chalapati appears in this book. Unnamed in one line, where I say there is a friend historian of mine who says our imagination of India is too Bengali. But in this argument, so you see, Gandhi starts publishing the Bhajanavali in 1922, the song of bhajans and other songs in ashram in Sabarmati. And in that first publication, he includes 3 songs: Janagana Mana, Vande Mataram, and Sare Jahan Se Acha. All 3 songs are there in the first edition. But for Gandhi, music was a tool. It was a tool towards social or religious or spiritual or political end. I don't think he ever saw art as art. No, here you have Tagore.
Gandhi was almost like Aurangzeb.
Well, I'm being gentler today. I can't even believe it, but that's amazing. Good to be on this side once in a while. So, Tagore on the other end understands. Like Gandhi actually asked Tagore this question, saying, he calls him the poet, and he says, this poet, pretty much, I'm paraphrasing, saying, what will poets do when people don't have food, don't have clothes? What is the use of poetry and music? He asks Tagore. Tagore gives it back to him. And he says, you don't understand what a poem can do. You don't know what a song can do.
In dark times, there will be poems about the dark times.
Exactly. And so, this debate is a very interesting debate of both politics, of aesthetics, of imagination, of what creativity was. And I must say, Tagore calls it out. He says, if you let students go to college, let them study, let them be educated, let them dream, that's the way they resist. It's interesting. He's saying that's the way they resist. They resist by knowing, they resist by learning. Not by saying you leave everything and come and spin. He was so obsessed with Charkha, Gandhi. At one point, he proposes to the Congress that anyone who wants to become a member, should have spun certain amount of Charkha.
Yeah, Noor Sanda was
exactly. Otherwise, you can't become a member. So, that became pretty much his.
No, even if it's aside, I want to strongly recommend this National Book Trust publication, the Mahatma and the Poet.
Yes, it's
one of the great documents of Indian intellectual history, which was edited by my teacher Sabyasachi.
It's a brilliant book. It's absolutely brilliant.
I think there are so many things that we want to discuss, but we are running out of time. I think we have about 10 minutes for the Q&A also. So I'll just throw you a couple of questions. One, this more like a devil's advocate. symbols, why should the meanings not change? Yes, I do agree that, you have this very angry lines that you say about, this fearsome shields. Yes, to my sensibility, somebody was read Kamban. The, Hanuman is Sundara,
Yes,
he is the hero of Sundaragand. He is the beautiful one. Not only that, he is Sollin Selvan. He is the master of language. To reduce him to, to just his physical valor, which he is not aware of at any point in time. His valor is something, his courage and his strength. People have to remind him. But my question is, yes, we subscribe to the values of the most aspects of India's freedom struggle. It is not just Gandhi or Tilak, but also somebody like Gokhale, who, for all the ridicule and scorn that somebody like Subramanya Bharati pours on Gokhale, Gokhale's legislative assembly talk on the need for primary education is what we need today. So why shouldn't the meaning of symbols change, or why cannot we impute new meanings to old symbols? What is your objection to it?
I have no objection to it. New meaning is going to happen. I mean, let's look at when, for example, the Ashoka pillar was chosen. New meaning was automatically beautiful because it was not exactly the meaning that it had when it was first constructed. Why was it constructed? Sarnath was the first sermon of the Buddha, and that's where the pillar was constructed. So its meaning there is entirely different. Symbolizes the Dharma Chakra Pravartanaya, the rolling of the Dharma Chakra is what it basically represents. So it represents something else. Now it becomes the Indian symbol. The moment it's becoming, there is a complexity there because you're bringing it to be a state symbol. Now immediately there's a power shift that we cannot ignore the moment it becomes a state symbol. So there is a new meaning. The new meaning is in a new era, in a new sentiment, a new leader. So meanings are going to change. I just have two issues. One is I actually believe that none of us have been allowed to have an emotional relationship with any of our siblings. Really. What we have, unfortunately, at some level is a subservient relationship. The state has made it worse by putting 1500 rules for everything else. I really believe I must be allowed to burn the flag. I do not believe that in this Insult to National Symbols Act, which unfortunately originated
here because of Periyar.
Because of Periyar. No, we should not clap for that. I wish the law was not there. Argument in the Legislative Assembly where he talks and he says, don't you understand what Periyar is saying? He's not saying he hates the Constitution. They were scared he's going to burn the Constitution. He doesn't hate the Constitution. He's asking you, what did you do?
It was at a time when the two were at loggerheads.
Yes.
That is even more important.
Yes. And it's a brilliant speech. Anna's speech in that council is brilliant. But that's the point. The point is, why don't we have an emotional relationship with these symbols? Seriously. That it is not something that we have to respect, but we have to love. We have, and I use the word love, and some people say love is too bare minimum. Respect. No, I'll still use the word love. Because, and that's what we have lost. Even our constitution. I mean, except for that civics textbook where we have that preamble in that little paragraph. I mean, do you really care about it? Like you said, it's a beautifully phrased preamble. It's beautifully phrased. Sheer beauty of that do we even look at? Do you look at the construction of it? Have you even taught why is, for example, the dignity of the individual placed before the integrity of the nation? That construction is a gorgeous construction. It means so much. We never discuss it in school. So that is the problem in what is happening today. Now, because we have not really developed that relationship with the symbol, and I'm keeping aside this whole question of should we even have symbols. That is a philosophical question of identities that we'll go over another day. But when we don't have it, what is actually happening today is a manipulation, right? It's a manipulation, and it is also a kind of violation, I'm going to use that word, not of the original meaning, but of the basic humanity and basic ethics of cohabitation that is inherent in every one of these symbols, whether it's the flag, whether it's the anthem, whether it's the emblem. The idea is we are people who are very different, who are not going to agree with each other, but we'll find ways in which we will live together. So weaponizing that sentiment, so what is being weaponized, Talapati, is not the symbol, but this sentiment is being completely demolished. And that is my objection. My objection is there. So I think my point is we have to find a way to develop our relationship with these symbols. We can disagree, we can say, no, I don't think the flag is a good symbol. Please, but let's have that relationship. Let's have that conversation. But right now, you really can't have that
Yes,
conversation.
one very interesting part of the book, which I was not aware of at all. That there are nations which have official translations of their national anthems,
Yes.
and it doesn't undermine the importance or the sacredness of that. Even handling ethnic strife is deplorable. Even they had an official
They have official
Tamil translation of their
the
national
anthem.
anthem.
I argue in the book that we should have been allowed to have the anthem sung in every regional language. In the same tune. Sing it in the same tune. Not very difficult to rewrite. There should have been a Janagana Mana in Tamil, Janagana Mana in Telugu. So the students...
You also mentioned how many of these words are mispronounced, especially in Tamil
Tamil
Nadu.
Nadu, for example, Jaya Ge is normal in a school.
Jaya Ge.
Because Jaya He is not natural to a Tamil speaker. Right? You go to any school, you will find many words in Janagana Mana complicated for the Tamil psyche, Tamil palate, Tamil language to pronounce. So I think we should have had Janagana Mana in Tamil. Why not? Just imagine the idea fascinates me. Imagine if every state sang the same tune, but in their own language, expressing the same sentiment. Isn't that really federalism? A symbolic way of looking at
That would
federalism.
be true nationalism, I would say.
Yeah, that too. So, I think we missed a beat there. Really missed a beat there.
So on that note, before I throw open the floor for questions, I'd like you to read, a couple of passages from your book.
I have two things I have marked. I'm not sure which one I want to do. So one thing that the book also discusses a lot is religion and faith. So I thought I'll either read from there or from Satyameva Jayate. I'll probably take the faith part. Marcus, go. Yeah. It's from the chapter on the preamble. And where the preamble chapter focuses mainly on fraternity as the word. A lot of scholars have, of course, written about the preamble, its beauty, but I've taken fraternity as being the focus of a discussion in that chapter, where the whole idea of dignity of the individual, how does that speak to equality, and stories that I've tried to weave around it. In the Indian context, the cultural and the spiritual are cohabitants of the same enclave. There are emotional crossovers between culture, religion, faith, and spirituality. Our thoughts and practices belong to more than one of these categories. Spirituality, though described as a way to realize the self, is always stuck between belief, ritual, and purity. More often than not, societal condescension and disregard of certain cultures is a judgment of their spiritual status. For long, I have refrained from using this word to describe my musical experience. I was afraid that it would be hijacked by the religious and filed in the religion rack. Clouded by that fear, I forgot that it could be the open door needed for the conservative faithful to join in a larger Catholic conversation. My musical experiences are spiritual. They are deeply moving philosophical dives that cannot be explained in words. But they are not otherworldly, nor are they transcendent or inaccessible to everyone else. And they most definitely do not place me at a higher level of consciousness. They are moments of reflection when I'm able to observe all the sensory inputs I receive, sans preconceived judgment. This also means I'm able to offer music without blocks or suspicion. Music breaks down the walls that isolate me. I stand before you with no protective gear. But there is one question that remains with me once I return from these enlightening musical voyages. Why am I not such a human being in my everyday life? For believers, perhaps this experience might arise when they stand before their Lord, a state in which the disturbing voices of oppressors don't haunt the oppressed. If that fleeting moment of uncluttered solitude exists for someone, no one has the right to snatch it away from them. I'm reminded of an old woman I met when a few of us were trekking up Parvatamale, a hill near the town of Tirunamale in Tamil Nadu. It was a 3-hour trek that includes a few tough stretches, a series of cement steps, and finally a precarious climb on and over a rock face. Waiting for us on the other side was Lord Shiva in the form of a linga. The weather in the month of May was blistering and dehydrating. As we neared the steps section, I noticed an old lady panting and scrambling over the steps. Every move was a Herculean task. I was concerned for her well-being. Her son kept providing her water to drink as she stumbled along. Every few moments, she called out the name of the Lord with whatever energy she had, pushing herself ever closer to the top. As she neared the temple, her voice got louder. She raised her arms in obeisance to Shiva, and her body suddenly moved with greater ease. It was as though walked towards the temple with an evident sense of expectation, like a lover would rush towards her beloved. She entered the temple in a state of thrall. She did not look around for validation. Neither did she act as though the trek was an achievement. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and her eyes remained transfixed on him, her God. The legend of Kannappa Nayanar is an evocative reminder that the relationship between God and the devotee needs to be unhindered. Kannappan, a hunter, fed his Shiva the meat from his hunts. He collected water in his mouth and spat it on the linga to bathe his Shiva. Shiva was decorated with the flowers that Kannappan plucked and carried in his own hair. Kannappan did not know that his every action threw Brahminical rules of ritual to the wind. This was his offering, his personal relationship with his Lord. The Lord had no right to refuse. One day Kannappan found that his Shiva was bleeding from one eye. Unable to stop the bleeding, Kannappan gouged out his own eye and placed it on the Lord's. Soon the other eye began to bleed. The only way to remove his other eye and offer it to Shiva was to use his foot as a place marker while using an arrow to gouge out his other eye. In the tale, Shiva is testing the devotee, an elucidation of bhakti. This is also a story about being free from fear of judgment. Kannappan decided how he would pray. The rite was not just freedom, it was dignity. This dignity was born from devotion. Every religion has stories of society shunning people who surrender to God in a manner of their choosing, and one need not be a saint to have this right. The Sabarimala temple case, dealing with the denial of worshipping rights to women who menstruate, is about the dignity of the bhakta. When a specific class of women are systematically refused the right to experience the joy of meeting their God, it is humiliation. Ritualistic traditions and mythological explanations are no defense for discrimination. According to Hindu ritualistic practice, when the eyes of a sculpted idol are opened, the deity comes alive. Once we attribute this quality to the idol, we can use scripture related to the temple, Sthala Puranas, to argue that the deity has made certain demands or issued regulations. In India, such a deity is a juristic person, and lawyers have argued that the ban is justified because the deity enjoys fundamental rights just like other citizens. In the Sabarimala case, Indra Jaisingh argued against such an equalization. And I quote, "There is difference between juristic person and citizens. He has no rights. Conscience doesn't reside in institutions, but in living beings. It is said that the eternally celibate Ayyappa wishes to maintain a fair distance from fertile women. Even if we are to accept that these are the wishes of the deity himself, and they need to be respected, one question still needs addressing. Do his wishes supersede the yearnings of a devotee? The power equation between Ayyappa and his devotees is skewed in his favor. But if he is the benevolent and loving God I sing about, then he does not dominate. He comes to the rescue of the weak. In a poem, Peruman Murugan asks Shiva whether it is right that he closes his eyes and the doors of his abode, the sanctum sanctorum, while the ignorant and malicious attack his devotee. I ask Ayyappa the same question. Why does he not respond? Has Ayyappa placed his personal principle about the bhakti of a devotee? Is not the burden of enduring the presence of the bhakta the God's rather than the woman's? For the Sabarimala Ayyappa to refuse darshan on the basis of gender to a devotee, who in order to worship him is willing to perform the required rituals and follow the mandated abstentions, is discriminating. Theologically, the only test that a woman devotee can be put through is a test that gauges her bhakti. Even if that's a test we don't ask of male devotees. Importantly, if mythology is to be believed, Ayyappa will find his own way of assessing each devotee. It is not something for us to be concerned about. But then, the problem is not the gods, is it? The problem is the male-constructed notion of purity. Privacy, or the right to the private conduct of affairs, though I cannot see how it applies to Ayyappa, cannot be used as an excuse for practicing a form of untouchability. As Jai Singh stated in a written submission to the Supreme Court, the practice of considering women impure between the ages of 10 and 50 must thus be considered the practice of untouchability. The word untouchability has not been defined, and there can be multiple forms of untouchability, which are not based on caste, but based on notions of impurity. The present case is one of this kind, she said. It is submitted that untouchables and menstruating women are similarly situated in relation to temple entry. Therefore, the ban on entry of women from age group of 10 to 50 amounts to untouchability. The argument that there are so many other Ayyappa temples that allow all women does not take away the unfairness of the exclusionary rule at Sabarimala. Neither does the whataboutery that there are other temples where some other group is denied permission justify this rule. No god can be kept beyond the reach of a devotee. This is both a religious and a constitutional right. Belief bashedly believing in oneself or something higher, and doing so without being trapped within a belief system or ideology. Its partner expression, faith, lies very close by, yet distinct, imbued as it is with the fragility and doubt. One could say faith yearns for belief. Bhakti is a confluence of these sensibilities and much more. Bhakti transforms the fragility in faith into a vulnerability to despair and even disappointment. When the doubt that faith embodies confluences with the freedom that belief offers, it can lead to critical thought. Uncritically accepting the primacy of practices in any shrine is where we draw the line. If discriminatory practices can be justified by scriptural tradition and further explained as the wish of the deity, what stops someone from saying that a specific Dalit community belonging to one village cannot enter a designated temple? Theoretically, there could be scriptures that tell a legend in which the Lord fought a battle against these specific people and hence took a vow never to set eyes on them.
Thank you, Krishna. We can have about 10 minutes of Q&A. Can I have some hands, please? So please have pointed questions or comments addressed to Krishna.
There's a microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you over there?
Check.
I can't see it.
Just checking if Tagore in any place says why he used the words Adinayaka and Bhagya Vidhata instead of Adinayaki and
So,
Bhagya Vidatri.
so Adhinayaka is not gender specific. It's not male. I want to make that very clear. Adhinayaka Jayahe is not male. In fact, in the penultimate verse, there is the feminine that comes in. So in this book, I also discuss about whether this song is gender specific, and I argue it is not gender specific. So Adhinayaka is not necessarily a man, though we would think. It is that supreme charioteer. You can explain Adhinayaka how you want to. I even take it as being the consciousness of your own conscience. So it depends on how you want to see it. So it's not gender specific, definitely. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Hi, I just want to circle back on the Charkha conversation. Is there any form of symbolism, in your opinion, to the usage of the Ashoka chakra in our flag over the Gandhi Charkha? Because there are versions before which actually used Gandhi's Charkha.
So the Charkha remained till the end, when it was replaced by the chakra, and Gandhi was very upset. In fact, Gandhi was very upset that they removed the Charkha, because for him, the Charkha was the reason why we got independence. So in fact, he pushes back the announcement. He's not happy with the announcement at all. Then he reconciles himself by saying, no, it's Ashoka, non-violence, so I'm okay, I'll live with it. And I think that there was a reason. One was actually an aesthetic reason. The aesthetic reason is very simple. You have the Charkha, you have this wheel, right? This side. The flag has to be seen on both sides. Right? So you see the structural problem, right? You needed something that will look the same on either side. And that was a problem with the, and that's stated actually as one of the reasons. There is also another reason. I think it was right that we moved from the Charkha to the, Charkha to the chakra, because I think we had to also progress in our imagination of movement. Because I think that the Charkha would have remained in a mode of labor of a sort towards something. Whereas the chakra is a symbolic of the movement of knowledge without any limitation. If you take it as a dharma chakra, it's without limitation. In fact, in this book there's this lovely passage, and very moving passage, when for the first sermon of Buddha, his 5 disciples are in front of him, and of course the divine people are supposed to have rejoiced, all the other worldly people rejoice. All this happens. Then towards the end of that entire sermon, there is one student of his who's supposed to have gotten realized, listening to Buddha. And one of the translations of that is what I found most interesting. The translation was that the dharma, that the new dharma that Buddha was elucidating to the world and to the other worlds, wouldn't really move unless it was shared to another person, and that person carried it on. So only when his student is realized and he receives it in abandon is actually dharma moving. Just because Buddha said it, it didn't move. This idea that you have to share, and only after you share does knowledge move, just because you know it's not good enough. And I think that in a way, to me, that's why I'll interpret it, is why it's there. Because the freedom is not just something that I receive. Dignity is not something I receive. Equality is not something I receive. That it needs to be part of every citizen of this country. And in some way you could say that the chakra symbolizes that possibility. And until then, we are still not free. Maybe it's a reminder that we are still not free actually. Which is what Periyar said long time ago too, by the way. This question.
Fascinated by this tradition of yours that
Yeah, but mic's not open, I can hear you. Go ahead.
I'm fascinated by this tradition that there should be Vande Mataram and all that. May I use this opportunity to request you to do this as a project and bring it out as an album? Are there legal problems?
Yes, there are legal problems. I have enough on my plate already. I don't want another case. Thank you very much. I'm very generous of you to offer that to me, but I mean, there are rules like you can't sing the anthem for more than 53 seconds.
52.
Okay, I'm sorry. I took 1 second extra.
I read your book very carefully.
Yeah, obviously I forget. 52 seconds, shorter version is 20 seconds. So you have all these very complicated rules. So I cannot do it. What I can do, where they can't stop me, is I can translate the other verses which are not part of the anthem. And in fact, one of the most interesting parts with Discovery was about the copyright transfer of Janaganamana. So they struggled to get the copyright. It was not so easy. Tagore's son was not so easy in giving the copyright. So Rabindranath Tagore troubles him to the point the government of India is tired. It's like, when am I going to get it? So actually I got the actual contract. And it is after 1.5 years. You know what his demand was? His request was, please don't change any word. Can you assure me? Home Ministry says, right now we have not changed, but we can assure you that we will not change. So even from then there are these problems. So I don't think, I'm glad you're fascinated, but I shall refrain from it. Somebody behind. And the mic on bed.
Check. Sir, you mentioned the conversation with Mahatma Gandhi and Tagore that he was telling when people don't have money to buy clothes or food, how can poetry inspire? So, could you give any examples from other nations where poetry has inspired people during tough times?
I mean, you can give how many songs can you say? I mean, you can ask, why you go to our Tamil literature? When the king went to war, the poets went with him. Why do the poets go with him? Poets went with him because poets were probably thinking about war, inspiring them. You can ask one question. Why does a mother who has no money, has no food, still sing a lullaby? The fact is, music and art just exist even in all kinds of situations. எத்தனை வீட்டில் கோலம் போடுவாங்க இந்த நாள் கோலம் போடுறாங்க. No, so there is a very, why does art always need to like provide a reason for its existence? I think we should ask why. I think that's where Gandhi is coming from. There's a reason. If you sing, make sure that something happens with that song. But Tagore is saying no. It has so many things at the emotional stage. I mean, I've heard so many IT people say, sir, after one day's school work, coming and listening to one song gives me peace. Now, if you ask me, does that song contribute to the GDP of India? I don't think so, right?
No.
But what does the 10 minutes of peace mean? That's the question that we are asking. So, there are umpteen number of examples from the marginalized. I mean,
We don't live by bread alone.
exactly. Or for example, imagine all the paintings that happen on huts, the walls of the huts. Why would they paint? That's the whole thing, right? It's far more complex. I mean, you could ask the question, why do we have art? Because art plays a role of imagination, of feeling about yourself, about your environment, creating a relationship that is not literal. Art is not literal, which is why it exists. Yeah, I will come to you, sir. That other person, just give it to him. Yeah, we will come.
Yeah, to add on to that point, even Russian Revolution was inspired by 5 poems, I guess.
I mean, all revolutions had a song or a thing.
Yeah, only 5 poems. It is a spark. So poems can't be a spark. So my question is about you didn't wanted to speak about that Gandhi and Ambedkar issue. You don't want to elaborate or?
I mean, I can elaborate about it. I mean, not that I don't want to. It's written in the book. It's in the book. I can't run away from it.
I didn't want to get in the trap.
What I don't want to do is I don't want to get into the trap of which side are you on. Are you on Ambedkar's side or Gandhi's side? I do take a position in the book. My position will come in the argument. You will realize what my position is. But my position is not an against position. That's what I'm trying to say. It's possible to take a position, yet not saying that I'm taking this position, say that is a horrible person. No. It has to be a position in which I try to understand where that is coming from. And I still disagree with it. I still agree with Ambedkar's positions. But I'm also trying to see how does... See, let's look at ourselves. We are looking at this argument between these two great intellectuals. Why are we looking at this argument? I believe we are looking at the argument because we are trying to understand something about ourselves, about our environment, about our actions, about today's world. Which means we must have the clarity to be able to look at it with not saying this is horrible, this is good. No, but saying, but where is the argument coming from? Where is it flawed? Why is it flawed? If it is not flawed, tell me why it's not flawed. And I do think Ambedkar's arguments are the arguments that I would prefer. Of course, there's no doubt about it. It's there in the book. But I still think understanding Gandhi requires nuance. That's all I'm saying. Disagree vociferously with Gandhi, of course, and I do. But it requires nuance. And without that nuance, we can't actually understand. Right? One thing can't define a person. Many things that define a person. That's what I think.
Can I say? Just in this correction, I am reminded of the famous quote that in the literary world often we say, the best poems are those that tell of saddest thoughts.
There's this one part which I wanted to say in Chennai. I never spoke much about it in any other place. You don't mind, before the next question I'll say, is Satyameva Jayate. So I have to tell you this really funny part. First, we didn't know who chose that motto. No, who chose it. Of course, some people told me that, sorry, Radha Krishnan, just only Radha Krishnan is supposed to have said it. So we don't know, Madan Mohan Malviya is supposed to have used it. We don't know. Anyway, so I go through all this in the book. On 29th May, I think, the Government of India chooses Satyameva Jayate 1950 and announces it. Okay? Sorry, 1949. Announces it. And in those days, everybody wrote to the Prime Minister and President. They never wrote to any Chief Secretary. Straight letter of Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister of India. So I need replies. That's the most amazing. Okay? I think I'm telling Salapati, the files on this are fascinating. There are like National Archives files and files and files of letters. Now, what are they writing? Now, this is interesting, especially because we are a Chennai Madras audience. So the complaint is you got it wrong. Why? In Sanskrit, it can't be Satyameva Jayate. It has to be Satyameva Jayati. Okay, I'll go to this. The reason is, first of all, this phrase is taken from the Mundaka Upanishad, which is meant mainly for ascetics, for renunciates and their lives. It's mainly meant for them. The full line is Satyameva Jayate Nandritam. That is, truth only triumphs, not untruth or falsehood. You can take it home. Now the complaint is based on a grammar. And first of all, most complaints on this Sanskrit usage came from the south of the Vindhyas. It's unbelievable. It's either a Tamilian or a Telugu or a Malayali or some Pandit from somewhere in Maharashtra who's saying, Jawaharlal Nehru, you're wrong. And Nehru panics. They issue a lightning telegram to every department saying, stop, stop, stop. Hold on, this is not yet our confirmed motto. Now, what is the argument? The argument is, there are two kinds of expression in Sanskrit, what is known as a parasmai pada and an atmane pada. So, that is, if a subject does an action, the benefit of the action goes to some other person, parasmai pada. If the benefit of the action is for the subject itself, atmane pada. Okay? So, based on this grammar rule, they all said, Satyam is the subject, Satyameva Jayate. And of course, in the Mundaka Upanishad, Satya is Sat, as in truth. But here we are using it, of course, as an everyday understanding of truth. Satyameva Jayate, subject is Satyam, then it has to be Satyameva Jayati, correct. So this argument goes on. So I've been looking at, so two scholars actually have kind of beautifully explained this, which I think is important to us. And one is, of course, Patrick Olivier, who's still there in Austin, and the argument is this. The problem is in the subject. Because you say truth is the subject. But who can truth win? Truth is an abstract idea. How can truth be triumphant? Only one who speaks the truth can be triumphant. Right? So if you shift the subject to be the rishi, the mendicant, and this is by two beautiful scholars who say that they've got the understanding of the line is actually the rishi in the context of the Mundaka Upanishad. The rishi who speaks the truth is triumphant. And then if you take the rishi out and say, if all of us speak the truth, then we are triumphant. Because truth can't win or be victorious. It is only we who speak the truth can. So it was such a fascinating grammatical thing that went into everything was kind of a rabbit hole basically this book.
Check. Hello, and I have a question. So, as young parents of young kids in this changing world where we see war, where we see a lot of things happening around us, how do you think we can make a difference? Because now, as older people, like not children anymore, we realize we come from a place of privilege, access to education, food, a lot of luxuries and everything. So when we're trying to present the upbringing for our children, how do you think? So for example, next week, Arya Nomba birthday. To not celebrate it would mean to not pass on the cultural heritage. I ensure both my son and my daughter sit and pray, and I ask Anirudh to pray for my well-being while I pray for his. But what else do you think? Apdi Pata, like you said, every cultural festival has a connection with the caste.
Of course.
So how do you think we can make them privileged? I mean, understand their privilege, but also maybe appreciating our culture, get into spirituality. Like it's very complex right now.
It is very complex. It's not easy. I completely agree it's not easy. Which is why I think I'm glad you asked this question, because it's an important question. Because you understanding the caste complication, etc., there is this feeling inside you still know to do it. Knowing very well. And I'm glad you asked this. But I think suppose you can pass on to your children your doubt. The very fact that you find it problematic. That you, bluntly put, because of a certain caste can practice certain rituals, but other people of another caste don't practice the same ritual, right? Why not share that trouble also with your children? Not at this age. Right? I'm not going to say, I mean, don't practice. I'm not going to pass that to you. I'm not going to say that. That's each one's own personal decision. But since you come to recognize that you're struggling, we think that we have to tell our children all the right things or give them a clean slate of understanding. No, don't give them that load. You tell them, look, I think this is important, somehow I'm bound by it, but these are the problems with it. And let them grow up and choose. Let them make their decision. Being open with them about this struggle is the best thing we can do. Because we have this privilege. And sometimes maybe we are too old to change. That's also possible. Right? That's also possible. But the children, they'll pick it up. Then they may choose that I will do this ritual, I will not do that ritual. Or they'll say, or they may even, I think, take it a step further. Something about which, since Adiyaman is also here, I wrote an essay and his daughter actually wrote a rebuttal to me and to Perumal Murugan, is can we reimagine the idea of ritual? I really feel we don't have the imagination. If you want to say you want rituals that are not embedded in caste, it requires creativity. It requires a new way to celebrate everything that you celebrate. Can you ensure that every celebration, it doesn't matter which caste you're from, you're part of that celebration? What do we do? It's not an agenda for you and me individually, but it is probably generational thought. And I think that you should think. So I would say, complicate your presence to your children.
So we are running out of time, but perhaps one last question.
There's
That
one.
would be the
Mic on, Bengali.
Check.
Yeah.
A small introduction about myself. If I go back to my WhatsApp group of my master's classmates and tell them I attended a book reading and a discussion on the book called We the People of India by T.M. Krishna, they will tease me saying, Maithili is going to write a book called We the People of Southern India. And that will be the teasing tagline. So my question to you is, haven't you been in forums where people say, if you grew up in the heartland of Punjab, you would have faced the emergency when it actually happened. And if you had seen Kurukshetra, if you had been through what our parents went through, and you were a much more privileged person being from the south. If you have been in forums where you have been accused of being privileged because you are from the south, how would you respond?
Okay. As much as we remember all the people who hold on to the anger from having experienced the partition, why do you forget of all the people who have also experienced the partition, lived there, but have looked at the entire thing differently? Why are those people not part of this conversation? There are people who are still hurting, and I'm not going to say anything about it, or generationally hurting. But there are so many people who have reached out to heal, reached out to find a way to converse, find a way to take that border, make that border invisible in some sense. There are poets, there are musicians, there are everyday people. There are enough people who are doing that job too. Why are they not part of this question or this discussion? Why are we only picking this? So I think we should also remember there are enough people who have also been able to transcend in some way, an emotional way as people, right? This is one. Two is, if this is going to be the cycle in which we are going to live, then the cycle is going to happen not just religiously, it will happen caste-wise, it can happen any other way. It can happen, there's caste violence happening now in Tamil Nadu as we speak. Even now, Dalits are most vulnerable. Right? So the question is, how are we going to address that, first of all, inequality and oppression, but also then how are we going to move from there? Right? So it is complicated, but I'm saying that we seem to very easily move towards the anger and hate part of experiences rather than the other part of experiences. You have stories where you've had Muslims who saved Hindus who saved Muslims, who took care of them in their house. Why is that not part of public imagination enough? Right? Which is why today when the Rohingyas come to India, what do? We're using the same language. We're doing the same language. The same way we treat them. Or the stuff we are doing now in the border in Assam. The detention camps and the way people are treated. In such an easy manner, just because you have a religious identity, you can be basically called termite. I mean, does it even make sense? Forget about political positions, forget about all this, just keep that aside. It is just a cycle of psychological, emotional violence, physical violence kept aside, that we are just going to keep on doing one after another. And you can keep asking, you have not experienced it, you don't know. I mean, but there is something called allyship also, there's something called understanding also, there's something called trying to be part of the conversation though you have not. If only people who are affected are going to be part of conversations, probably we can't have most conversations in society. Right? We can't. The question is, the person who is not experienced, are they listening? Are they willing to listen to all the experiences? What am I willing to take from the experiences? Where will I participate in experience? These are the questions. So let's be slightly more open when we choose these kind of and I think at some level these are such frivolous ways of having a discussion. You have no experiences, how do you know? I mean, what do you say after that?
Thank you, Krishna, so much. Krishna will sign books, but I have one small request and final question for Krishna. First, the request is, I want you to add an appendix in the next book, in the next edition, where you will talk about the course of what happened to Sare Jahan Se Acha.
Oh, yes.
That would be an appendix.
Okay.
Then, what is going to be your next book?
Okay, I'm going to read the last line of my acknowledgements. That's the response to your question. Or the last but one line, which tells you what I'm doing right now. But nobody's going to believe that I'm going to actually do it. But I shall... Does Sangeeta believe it? I don't think so. So the last line of the acknowledgements is... I promised my daughters, Arya and Ananta, that I will take a break from plunging into another book project. Because the last two have taken up 9 years of my life, I will keep that promise. So that's my response.
Well, that's not a happy note to end this meeting, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
பொதுவாக Public intellectual and activist who has won the Ramon Magsaysay Award. Krishna is the author of several previous books, including Sebastian and Sons, A Brief History of Mridangam Makers, and A Southern Music, The Carnatic Story. In the midst of his music and his intellectual activism, he also somehow finds time to climb every mountain. In conversation with him is Professor A.R. Venkatachalapati, a prominent historian, author, and translator. Apart from his scholarly writings in English, he has written or edited over 30 books in Tamil. His many books in English include Swadeshi Steam on V.O. Chidambaram Pillai's battle against the British Maritime Empire, and Who Owns That Song on the battle for copyright of Bharati's works. He most recently co-edited the Cambridge Companion to Periyar. Today, Krishna and Venkatachalapati will be talking about the ideas and discoveries in Krishna's book, We the People of India, Decoding a Nation's Symbols. Across the country, we have seen a reclaiming of our national symbols as an assertion of nationalism and patriotism. Simultaneously, we've seen the use of these symbols to
I learned recently. 750. 750. I didn't know that. I was and Kapila.
Can I have the QR code?
Thanks so much. I have to take my copy. Okay. 750. Yeah. You can have it. 750, yes. BH. Double हो गया ना? Thank you. Sorry. धन्यवाद. Oh, okay. Thank you for coming. Who do I sign it to? I learned recently. 750. 750. I didn't know that. I was
And Kapila. Can I have the QR code?
You can have 750, yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you for coming.